Today, we've launched our State of the Nation's Food Industry Report for 2025. This is one of our two flagship reports at the Food Foundation and tracks industry progress towards more healthy and sustainable diets, identifying urgent actions for both businesses and government to take in support of this transition. And thanks to our annual benchmark, Plating Up Progress, which assesses the progress of 37 major UK food businesses, this year we found that none of the 16 out-of-home businesses we assessed has a sales-based target for increasing sales of healthy food, highlighting the urgent need for swift implementation of mandatory reporting across all sectors to ensure an industry-wide shift. And in contrast, all of the UK's 11 major supermarkets now have a target to increase sales of healthy food. Additionally, while all major food businesses have set net zero targets, which is positive, only 2/3 have a target and disclose data on Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions for most food companies contribute the majority of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're driven by emissions along the supply chain and by agriculture. And just 1/3 of those companies we assessed have a transition plan for a 1.5-degree world. So that means they actually have a plan for hitting their net zero goals. Just one major food business, Lidl, has an animal plant protein split target and discloses data on their progress, despite this being absolutely crucial for meeting net zero targets and achieving sustainable diets. And when we talk about protein split targets, that's a target to increase sales of plant protein as a proportion of total protein sales. And this is actually an area where UK retailers are really starting to lag quite far behind many of their peers in Europe, many of whom have adopted animal plant protein split targets already. This year's report has also dived deeper into the world of corporate lobbying, which suffers from a real lack of transparency. We found that the number of food industry meetings with ministers dwarfs the number of meetings with NGOs, with 10 times as many meetings for industry as with NGOs. And over 3/4 of industry meetings with DEFRA were with trade associations. And when it comes to the availability of healthy and sustainable food, just 6% of ready meals in supermarkets and 7% of restaurant menu options contain pulses. Whilst restaurants like Wagamama's, Vintage Inns, and JD Wetherspoons are the restaurants with the best availability of pulses on their menus, we found quite a large variability, and others such as Tobi Carvery and Stonehouse Pizza had no pulses on offer at all across their menus. Restaurants, pubs, and bars are the out-of-home sector with the most calorific menus, with dishes averaging 726 calories. And again, there's huge variation across businesses here. The average calorie count for an item on the menu at Stonehouse Pizza and Carvery is 1,015 calories, compared to just 406 calories at Nando's. And healthy options aren't always the most affordable either. On average, a week's worth of healthy lunchbox items for children bought from UK supermarkets cost 26% more than a week's worth of equivalent unhealthy lunchbox items. And finally, the foods that companies advertise to us are very much skewed towards less healthy options. And this year we found that a number of companies are exploiting the loopholes and omissions in the forthcoming ban on TV and online advertising for high fat, salt, sugar, or HFSS foods that's coming in this January. So outdoor advertising spend by food companies increased by 28% between 2021 and 2024, following the government's announcement in 2020 of a forthcoming ban on TV and online advertising. McDonald's increased outdoor advertising spend by 71% between 2021 and 2024. Additionally, over 2/3 of food marketing cues on the world's most popular video game live streaming platform are for unhealthy food and drinks, and 77% of branded cues were for energy drinks and soft drinks, with 1/5 of branded cues for the out-of-home sector, particularly fast food restaurants. So what does this tell us? Well, this year's safety report shows that we cannot continue to leave progress on healthy and sustainable sales to the market. Healthy and sustainable food remains unavailable and unaffordable for far too many. And in the absence of mandatory action and regulation from the government, we're seeing only uneven progress towards healthy and sustainable diets, with only the most progressive companies transparently reporting and setting meaningful targets to drive change. So what can be done to change this? Encourage a level playing field for businesses and ensure the entire market shifts in the right direction. What should businesses do, and what is needed from the government to support this transition towards healthier and more sustainable diets? Well, today we've brought together a panel of businesses and investors working on some of these knotty issues to discuss exactly that.
So, hello everybody. I'm Anna Taylor, the Executive Director of the Food Foundation, and really delighted to be here today with four wonderful panellists to talk about the State of the Food Industry report. So, very welcome to you all. Claire, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Claire Lorains and I'm the Group Quality and Sustainability Director at Tesco, and great to be here with you today.
Thanks, Claire. Andy?
I'm Andy Wright. I am the Responsible Business Director at Samworth Brothers.
Great to have you with us. Andrew?
Andrew Selley, Chief Executive at Bidfood.
Great. And Rachel?
Hello, everybody. Rachel Crossley, Head of Stewardship for Europe at BNP Paribas Asset Management.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're here today to mark the launch of the 2025 State of the Food Industry report. And in that report, we really try to look across the businesses that are operating in the food system, particularly the very big businesses. We tend to focus on about 37 businesses. And we're really trying to monitor the extent to which they are moving towards helping their customers to eat more healthy and sustainable diets. And we do that by looking through four main lenses. The first is around standards and transparency. And we're going to have a lot of conversation today about reporting, setting targets, where the government policy agenda has got to on that, and where we'd like to see it go next. And then the three main lenses through which we at the Food Foundation kind of look all the time, which is, are those healthy and sustainable foods available in the right places? Are they affordable to people? And are they appealing, delicious, tasty? So we won't be diving into all the specifics of the statistics. They're all there in the report for you all to look at. But I really wanted to talk to you all today about sort of where you think we're at, where we need to be going next, where you see the big priorities for government policy, because obviously there's a lot of live policy conversations happening at the moment, and keen to hear where you think the biggest difference could be made. And so in starting that conversation, I wanted to sort of start from the big picture, really, which is we're sort of at the beginning stages of the government developing a food strategy. We've set out, published in July, their kind of policy framework, I guess, for the food strategy. And in the heart of it is this idea of a good food cycle. So I'm really keen to hear from each of you about what you would really like to see in the food strategy. What do you think would really move the dial? I mean, the report shows we've got progress in some areas, but real big gaps in other areas. And you're looking at the system, with all the commercial imperatives that you each face in different parts of the system. So what's really needed in the food strategy that makes it so that you can align your commercial imperatives with these goals of delivering healthy and sustainable diets? So should we start with you, Claire? What would you like to see in the food strategy?
So as a general principle, we're very supportive of the government's work on the food strategy. But at the same time, we have had a long-held belief, which is particularly around policy when it comes to food and farming. We believe the process of policy making can quite often be very short-term and sometimes can be quite fragmented with departments working in silos. So we believe there is a really good opportunity for the food strategy to be embedded at the heart of decision making, which not only can solve some of these issues, but also helps create a level playing field for in the whole of the food industry together, and tackle some of the longer standing challenges that we've seen, particularly if I think about farming and food manufacturing around planning reform. So something that we hear a lot from our farmers and our supplier partners. And actually, we published our Green Print Live report in January this year, which talked very much about the key themes that we're hearing from our farmers. And one of the biggest things is the lack of certainty and giving them challenges in how they can plan for the future. So we're very optimistic that actually the food strategy being embedded at the heart of what we are all trying to do will allow us to create that level playing field and really make a bigger difference going forward.
So when you talk about the heart of government, you're talking presumably political lead, like how the extent to which we really shore up some top level political leadership on this agenda. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
So I think what's really important is that we understand that everybody has to play a role. So clearly, as a business like Tesco, we have a role to play our part, both now and in the future, but the whole of the food system is going to have to come together. And I think the role for government is, where are there elements where by creating that level playing field and creating that consistency, it really helps us go further and faster together.
So you talked a bit about that long-term picture. Rachel, that's presumably you're very much looking at the long term a lot of the time. Tell us a bit about what you'd like to see in it from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. From our perspective, the biggest impediment to us being able to deliver long-term returns to savers and investors, our clients, are global long-term systemic risks. So climate change, nature loss, inequality, things like AMR, antimicrobial resistance, which has its roots to a large extent in the food industry, as well as other kind of impacts on people's health and therefore productivity and the role they play in society in all the different facets. So, you know, to us, the goal should be to tackle and ameliorate these long-term systemic risks, and that it should be embedded in the latest science. So our North Star is really the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet that was just updated and released a few weeks ago. And that shows us we've already transgressed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. The planetary boundaries are the life support system on which we all depend as individuals, as businesses. So for us, we always look to align our investment policies and processes, practices to the best available science and also, you know, the best available economic analysis. So we've had report after report after report from the World Bank, from the Food System Economics Commission, from the UK Food Farming and Countryside Commission. Every single one says the costs and impacts of the current food system massively outweigh the value that it's generating. Yeah. So for us, it's got to absolutely, this policy, this strategy has to have that very long-term focus and also be very joined up, because the solutions to a lot of the problems we face are common and they're very similar. So joined up in terms of the topics, but joined up in terms of the government departments that are involved, so that it's a whole of government strategy and policy.
Yeah. So this point about what you might call the externalities or these costs which are felt into environmental terms, taxpayer terms, in terms of NHS. Andrew, how do you think, we know that the government is really putting kind of growth at the centre of everything, really, and that includes the food strategy. How does it manage this kind of challenge of, the more sort of growth that Treasury wants to see, but also recognising these big externalities that are to some extent a drag on growth? Can you see that the food strategy can find a way through that?
Well, it has to, doesn't it? I think fundamentally the main points around the food strategy is that wider availability of healthier, more affordable, more sustainable food, more food security, more food grown in our country, which is a big part of obviously that reduction of climate impact, etc. I think the fundamental thing from our perspective is that it has to recognise that the food system is a system. You're eating at school, secondary school, university, you're eating at work, you're eating at home with the food you've bought from Tesco's, other retailers are available. You're eating when you go out in the evening, you're eating in the care home when you're old. From like cradle to grave, it's the food system. And obviously the retail market is more advanced in terms of data and reporting, etc. But out of home and catering is sort of 40% of the market. And we need to have an understanding of how I think we can support out of home operators and SMEs who supply that part of the market, who aren't geared up to do all of this reporting, as I'm sure we'll cover later, to help them get to that level. Otherwise, we're not going to get a full understanding of the full picture across the country.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to come back to that point about the sort of uneven picture, if you like, that we see across the different parts of the food industry on reporting. But before we do that, Andy, I just wanted to look back to you on the food strategy. And Rachel and Claire have talked a little bit about that North Star. You talked about it in a sort of form of a diet. You talked a bit more about certainty within farming in particular. One of the things that we'd really like to see come out of the food strategy process is some primary legislation which really sets out our expectations of the system and how we might track it in the long term, in part to create some of this business and investor confidence, regulatory certainty and that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you could imagine businesses getting behind as a proposition?
Yeah, I think most businesses are pretty supportive of what we're trying to do in this space. I think what most of us want, I mean, you talked about like cross-party agreement in terms of different departments wanting different things. I think the biggest thing we want is certainty. So it's easy for us to get behind if we can plan and if we know what's expected. And if that expectation is across the piece, then it's pretty easy to plan for and it's easier to make traction. And it allows us to think about, our efforts can go into things like innovating because we know that it's certainly going to happen.
Yeah.
And then we can plan for it.
Yeah, that's a really helpful example. I just want to come back to you, Claire, briefly on this point about farming, because there's a lot of conversation now happening around are we moving backwards in terms of sort of UK food security, as in ultimately producing less at home. Obviously, there are some merits to that in terms of resilience and multiple trade partners, etc. But there's also a counter argument around climate shocks, the extent to which we really want to outsource all of our food production, for example, to be crude, say it crudely. But why does this matter from your perspective? What are you seeing in terms of sort of future suppliers? What's that long-term picture? Why do you think this certainty for farmers is so important?
So if I may start with, we're really proud to be the biggest customer of British agriculture. And to me, it's really important that we have a healthy, thriving UK farming sector, because as you've said, and as some of us have mentioned, providing our own food is really important for the UK's resilience and food security. That said, there will always be instances where it is right from either a food security perspective or a choice perspective to then source products more broadly. But I think what I hear when we talk to our farmers is, and it's a bit like what you said, they are looking for certainty or more certainty in the longer term to be able to plan their businesses. They are passionate about providing British customers with great products, but they do need more certainty around in a landscape that over the last few years has felt less certain. So for us, UK agriculture and farming is an absolutely crucial part of how we all produce and provide a really sustainable food system across, as you say, every part of the food system and for every part of our life stage.
Okay, great. So it seems like there's a sort of an argument for long-term legislative framework, if you like, from investors, business and farming perspective, which seems kind of important if we're going to get that everybody is backing it. Let's move on to a bit more specifics now around, you touched on it a bit, Andrew, around mandatory reporting. Now, obviously, in the NHS 10-year plan in July, the government set out an ambition to introduce mandatory reporting on the healthiness of food sales across all large businesses. And each of your companies, and I know Rachel uses this data, but you're each reporting on those measures in slightly different ways at the moment, but with or without targets. What do you think and then the other point I wanted to just briefly make, Andrew, is you said that we see, a big gap really in the out-of-home sector. You're the only wholesaler that's really sort of active in this space. Maybe we could just start by, what's your reflections on why is that? Why have we got the retail sector like so much further ahead on already reporting and disclosing and setting targets, even though they'll have to become consistent with the new legislation, but nevertheless we're in a strong starting position. But the out-of-home sector, we've got kind of really big gaps. Why is that?
Well, I think there's a lot of obviously consumer drive in terms of information of what am I buying when I'm going into retail? What am I getting when I pick it off the shelf? Obviously, as I say, 65% of our suppliers are SMEs. If you look in our warehouse, it's a lot of brown boxes. We have to stick our own barcodes on for the warehouse management system, and inside those brown boxes are packs and boxes that a chef is going to have in his kitchen as ingredients to a menu. So whilst there's like calorie reporting on some menus, there's not that level of reporting through to the end consumer of, you know, the metabolics or whatever, the facts of what they're eating. So it's really not been a requirement. And I think that's part of the issue when we look at, you know, mandatory reporting, is you've got, you know, a whole host of information in retail, very little information in out of home. And, you know, there's a danger that we say, well, let's just focus on retail, but you're going to miss out 40% of the market. On the other hand, you say, well, let's then find a measure that's applicable across the whole market. And, you know, that's going to be quite a primitive measure for someone like Tesco. But, you know, I think it's better to have, you know, go for, you know, pragmatism, not perfection. And let's get something that everybody can measure, rather than just one part of the market. And then we need support really for these SMEs who, you know, they are small businesses. They haven't got the resource necessarily to put into analysing and providing this information. So there is support needed to help, you know, the whole supplier base come up to that level of sophistication in terms of reporting.
Yeah, okay. Rachel, from your perspective as an investor, why, I know you were part of the investor coalition that was calling for this introduction of mandatory reporting. Even the coalition was named in the NHS 10-year plan. Why is it so important from an investor perspective? What does it help you do?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. I mean, you can imagine that, you know, data is our lifeblood, really. So from our perspective, but a lot of investors, most investment companies these days, when we're making investment decisions, we're combining financial analysis with sustainability analysis. So we have, you know, in-house models that assess companies' sustainability, covering environmental issues, social issues, and governance and business ethics. And so we're one example of a very, very large investor, global investor. So our investment universe is actually 10,000 issuers, and then we invest in about 5,000. And so we need to have standardized well, either a company who's issuing equity or bonds that we're investing in mostly. So we need standardized data.
So you're choosing from 5,000 out of 10,000?
Yes, and we need the same data points for all of them, so it's fair, you know, that we have the same basis for analysis. Yeah. Okay. And then, you know, in the UK, that's just a microcosm of the bigger picture. And the biggest sort of priority for us is that it's companies listed on stock exchanges that are the majority of our investments rather than private companies. So in terms of a scope, for us, primarily it would be listed companies that are within scope, and that tends to mean the larger to medium-sized companies rather than the SMEs, or the really smaller SMEs. So for us, listed companies is the priority, and standardization. But I agree with what you were saying, that it's unlikely, I think, that we can come up with metrics that work perfectly for manufacturers, retailers, restaurant chains, contract caterers, wholesalers, etc. So there might have to be some adaptation that makes those metrics suitable to the particular segment.
Andy, let's come to you, because Samworth Brothers is a private company, so not listed in the way that Rachel's describing, but yet you've done quite a lot on this sort of transparency and disclosure agenda. Where are the incentives from your perspective? Because it's not directly linked into the investment community. Yeah. Well, yeah, without, you know, in the absence of legislation, you've actually taken the move voluntarily, if you like. And I'm interested to understand what made that happen.
Yeah, so I suppose ultimately, we're privately owned. We're a family-owned business, and we see ourselves as purpose-driven, and like really, really do see ourselves as purpose-driven, as opposed to a sticker above the door. And as part of that, we want to be a responsible business, and part of being a responsible business is knowing where your impacts are and doing something about them. And as part of our responsible business strategy, transparency is a key foundation of that strategy. So ultimately, how we collate the data and how we disclose that data internally and externally is really important to us, so we know where we are. I think Andrew's points, I'm really caught on this between you guys in terms of I'm a corporate sustainability guy. Like, data's my thing. I love a bit of data, and we report a lot. But I'd love to see mandatory report. I'd love to see all businesses doing the same thing. But Andrew's point around it's got to be simple enough that everybody can do it. Totally agree. But with simplicity also comes issues around, well, what can we do with the data if it's too simple?
Yeah.
And actually, I haven't got an answer to this, by the way, but I really believe that, look, business needs to be seen as the solution to the problem, not just the problem. And there's something with the data that can incentivize action as opposed to just being a kind of regulatory stick.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think an example that I would give would be, again, not my area of expertise, but I think in the nutrient profile modelling using the 2004 version was total sugars. So if I look at all of our suppliers will report on total sugars, and we've got that information. The later legislation looks at free sugars or added sugars, and again, only 35% of our suppliers have got that. So do you want to at least report on something that everyone has, or do you want to report on free sugars? And for me, I would go for let's report on something that everybody has, and you can make assumptions and actions based on that. At least you're including everyone, rather than going for something that 60% of the market in our sector won't be able to report on.
And presumably we need enough sort of flexibility within the way that the legislation is written that you could ratchet it up over time. You start pragmatically and then you say, well, our ambition is to add another layer next year and another, and we're giving you enough time to work through your data systems to make that kind of possible, so that you then start to actually get data which really can help you think about how, really inform business decisions really in a valuable way.
I think the other question is what you do with that data, because there's data and then there's targets, for example. And again, if I was looking from the out-of-home sector, it's far more nuanced than, you've got the same targets in a hospitality business as you have in a retailer, because in a retailer you're doing 28 days of your shopping, including all your fruit and veg and everything healthy. In a restaurant, you might be going out twice a month for your sort of luxurious treats. So therefore, speaking for myself, that will be more unhealthy than what I'm buying from the supermarket. So again, there's the reporting, and then there's the how you're going to target improvements. And again, that can't be sort of standard across everywhere.
This is definitely challenging, I think. Claire, to bring you in, so we're really keen, as I'm sure you know, in fact, in the Plating Up Progress sort of benchmark, which feeds into the State of the Food Industry report, we look at businesses reporting across three areas. So the healthiness of sales, as well as fruit and veg and animal and plant protein. We're really keen to make sure that the mandatory reporting when it comes in is not only the healthiness of sales, because partly for some of the reasons that you describe, you could kind of move your mark or, improve the healthiness of your sales by selling more bottled water, for example. And you're not really dealing with some of the kind of big challenges around fibre consumption or some of these other really important challenges. What's your thinking on, because you've done a lot of work on disclosure, like where would you like to see this mandatory reporting process land?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of actually what everyone else has said. I think so. If I think about Tesco, we're really proud to be on track to deliver our own target and our own healthy sales of 65% by the end of this year. And that is something that we will continue to obviously look at for our business. But this is a challenge that none of us can do alone. And I think, therefore, the most powerful thing around mandatory reporting is to be able to find a way that we can all measure, because it's confusing for customers that we all measure in different ways or that businesses don't. But actually, it's really hard just as an industry to put together everything we're doing and see the great progress we are making, but also, as you've said, those areas where we need to work more. So I think for us, that's why, along with our health charity partners, we did write to the government to sort of put the case for mandatory reporting earlier on this year. And we really do think it's critical to level the playing field. And I think, a bit like Andrew, you said, I think we need to find a method that is feasible for as many people in the industry as possible, because having that broad view of what we are doing as an industry, I think, is where we can then truly take action on what the data is showing us and transform and make far bigger scale impacts than we can today as individual businesses. Within that, I think there are elements that it's important that we do also measure. But that may be things that we measure within our businesses, as well as that sit within the reporting. Because I think, to all the points that everyone's made, it's important that the mandatory reporting is a methodology that we can all get behind. And I think that's why, collectively working with government, with Nesta, with other forums, whether it's the IGD, whether it's yourselves, to say what is going to be practical is really important. Specifically on protein, maybe if I can, look, we're really pleased that since 2021 we have shared publicly the plant-based protein, our plant-based protein sales and the percentage of overall protein. And we're aware that in the UK, I think all of us, that diets will need to evolve to have less meat and less dairy over time. But I think, Andy, it goes back to your point. I think it's how, as a sector, do we think about what innovation can help customers with those choices? So whether it's more veg-led, whether it's plant-based alternatives, or those simple swaps that we can all do of adding in, I know we'll probably come on to talk about beans, but adding in, more fruit, veg, pulses, whole grains, beans. I think it's all of that just helps us move forward on those dietary changes.
Thank you. You've each in different ways mentioned this sort of notion of the level playing field, and therefore the role that legislation can play in creating that. But have any of you got a really sort of tangible example to explain kind of why that matters, so that it kind of brings it to life? Go on, Tom.
I'm happy to share one that's on my mind. I mean, it's a couple of years ago now, but if you look at HFSS and the first sort of stages of the legislation, what it did within retail and within our manufacturing on our supply base is everyone stepped forward to look at, with one set of targets and one set of, boundaries for products, how we could look to make products healthier. And I think what that does is it aligns everyone behind a common goal. Now, as I said, I think there's lots of different ways that we all need to work individually as businesses, collectively as industry. But that would probably be my example, where if you look at what's happened since those first stages of HFSS, we have seen product reformulation, which has helped improve the lives of our customers.
So you're really saying there with that example that it's the way to sort of see the whole system shift in a positive direction.
I use prioritisation as well, isn't it? The clue's in the title for me that we work in fast-moving consumer goods, and fast is the key bit. Like, our business is built to deliver tomorrow. Like, there's a lot of effort goes into delivering tomorrow. There are less people in the business focused on delivering 5-10 years out because of the nature of the industry. But legislation helps to cement some. We talked, consistency, that future planning piece, to go, right, this is something we are going to have to resource, we are going to have to get behind, we are going to have to innovate. Therefore, we need to strategize, we need to put time and effort into it.
Yeah, good. Okay, so let's move on a little bit to the kind of protein disclosure side of things, because it's one of the areas where, again, we see quite an uneven picture. So here we're talking about the sort of shift to more sustainable diets, and the shift from a bit less animal protein to a bit more plant protein, essentially. And as you will see from the merch on the table, we launched our Bangin' Some Beans campaign, which is all about trying to double the consumption of beans in the UK over the next 3 years. And thanks to Bidfood for a great pledge on the day. But that's all kicked off in the right direction. And certainly we see that as being helping to create some of that consumer demand and sort of headwind, if you like, for those of you that are making either Scope 3 targets or are setting targets around plant and animal protein. Where do you see, what are the complexities around this particular metric? Because it's not perhaps the one that it's, there's a mixed picture in terms of the extent to which people have adopted it. Let's start with you, Claire. Where do you think that some of the challenges are, particularly on that? You disclose plant protein, don't you?
Yeah.
And not the animal, is that right? Yeah.
So as I said, that since 2021, we've disclosed our percentage of plant-based protein. And I think, the reality when you look at the meat reduction and the dairy reduction that I think we all know from both a health and an environmental perspective will need to happen in our diets it is a complicated landscape. And it is actually one that is going to involve a huge amount of societal change as well as individual change and across the food sector. And, forgive me for repeating it, I think it is one where a level playing field is going to be essential, because, there are many different stakeholders in this topic, and actually it's about balancing all of their needs. So I think it is one of those more challenging topics, but it is one where I think, when I look at therefore what we are focusing on in the nearer term, it is very much about, how are we helping customers with what they're asking us for, which is guidance and ideas of how they can build these changes into their diet every day, with whether it's through brand new innovation or whether it's through veg-led ideas, and over time then how do we see that flow through into hopefully the healthy reporting that we'll all be doing.
Thanks, Claire. So Andrew, you made a pledge around beans in particular. What's your plan for how you're going to deliver it?
Come up with a plan later. I think there are a number of ways that we can do that. Obviously, like I said, different environment than retail. So I guess there's firstly which has probably most of us all done as parents. How do you sneak healthy stuff into less healthy food? So we work with all of our customers around menu development, product development, dish development, and a lot of our customers have their own sort of climate goals, etc. So working with them on how do you include more beans and pulses and lentils in some of the more sort of standard dishes like lasagna, cottage pie, etc. is quite a straightforward, if more subtle way of doing it. We also know that unsurprisingly, the more plant-based or bean-based or whatever dishes you put on a menu, the more you sell. It's not a direct correlation. So if you increase it by 50%, you don't sell 50% more. So again, the restaurant still has to be cognizant of the fact they've got to offer what the consumer is wanting, what the consumer finds appetizing. But we know that the more options we give our customers to serve beans and lentils and pulses, then the more they will sell. And finally, I guess through our e-commerce and social media, the more you put it in front of customers, then the more decisions they'll make in that favour.
Great. And we're really hoping, obviously, that the sort of digital campaign helps to fuel some of that.
Well, our chefs love a bit of TikTok and a bit of Instagram, so they'll be all over that. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Rachel, let's come to you. It would be great if you could just explain from your perspective why the animal-plant thing is so important. You set out at the beginning in terms of context, the Lancet diet, etc. Just remind us why that's so crucial. But then I'd also love you to come on and just, we highlight in the report this sort of gap, I guess, between businesses that are setting scope 3 targets, sometimes with accreditation or approval from the Science Based Target Initiative, some not yet, but fewer who have really got kind of published plans about how they're going to get there. And obviously the conversation, in particularly in these industries, scope 3 is so much about meat and plants, essentially, meat and dairy and plants. Yeah. So dive into that and tell us a bit about why it's so important and why we see this gap. Does that matter in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, going back to the North Star, the Eat Lancet diet, which is telling us that there needs to be a substantial reduction in consumption of red meat and dairy, but massive increase really in fruit, veg, whole grains and legumes. So one of the reasons for that is obviously to try to reduce emissions, and for the food sector, the vast majority, around 90% of emissions, come from the supply chain, from agriculture, from production. Therefore, if you're going to drive down those scope 3 emissions, there needs to be a very, very strong focus, we think, on emissions from animal protein. So again, to focus minds, we ask companies to develop the plans, but I'll come back to that. So we want to see a really ambitious goals to reduce those scope 3 emissions, and we ask companies not only to ensure that those scope 3 emissions are included in any targets and plans, which is not the case across the board yet, but then the next step we ask for is the reporting on the plant-based versus animal-based protein, but also then to split out in their reporting of greenhouse gases methane, because methane is the big problem related to livestock. So to report on methane emissions, and then also to explain how those methane reductions are going to be reduced. And then that needs to be a combination of changes to diet, but also changes to livestock rearing practices. And yeah, so,
So let me just make sure I've got this right. So you talked at the beginning about, you've got the 10,000 issuers and 5,000 which you're then making decisions about to invest in. Yeah. A subset of which presumably are food companies.
Subset.
Okay. And so for each of those food companies, you're making these requirements in terms of reporting to you through your kind of stewardship engagement stuff.
That's what we'd like to see the sector do.
I see. So you're not like...
We can't speak to that. We can't speak to every single food company.
Yeah.
We're doing, a lot of that through things like Climate Action 100 Plus, through Nature Action, through FAIR's engagement programs. Lots of acronyms. Climate Action 100 Plus, Nature Action 100, which are big collaborative investor initiatives, plus FAIR. So within FAIR, actually, those engagements, we focus a lot on the protein question and asking companies, as some have done in Europe and in the UK, to start setting targets to splitting those kinds of data out. Because, then, if, as you said, it focuses minds and it drives innovation and new ideas about how to actually deliver that. So this kind of thing, in terms of those requests, tend to be embedded in those kinds of dialogues, which are then held by lots of different investors across all of the companies. So hopefully, eventually, the common message is coming across. We individually can only speak to a certain number of companies, but also through things like your investor policy coalition, delivering those kinds of messages also from on the policy front as well as to industry. So
I was going to comment on this.
Yeah, please do.
This data, I'm loving the data bit, but I'm really torn between kind of the complexity. So, protein diversity is one measure, and it, to Andrew's point, it's simple enough that more companies can get involved in it, and it is an indicator. But from Rachel's perspective, it's probably not enough of an indicator in terms of it's a fairly simple, crude measure. And if we're talking about decarbonisation and broader net zero, then how does it measure as an indicator on what is a company really doing? So we've already talked about simplification across industry bodies and what we're doing with the government. So yes, we're talking about data standardization within the food strategy, but there's also consultation out around sustainability reporting in the UK and CTAP's climate transition action plans. And how do all these measures come together to enable the data reporting that we need in order to get the right level of transparency?
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts basically on the kind of policy front, which you're pointing to, and the importance of some of that landing. I think going back to your point, Andrew, about pragmatism, start with pragmatism, then make it perfect over time, rather than starting with perfection. But you've made in Samworth Brothers, you're one of the only manufacturers, I think, to disclose on plant animal protein. You disclose on that, don't you? Yeah. And are you finding the data useful? Or is it too early? Is it too early to say?
Is it useful? Honestly, not massively. It gives us an indication, but we've probably got other data that we would find more useful. So it isn't the only measure we look at. So we also assess our organisational scope 3 footprint, which we will get from our procurement data.
Right.
We also look at our product footprint from our sales data as well. So we can break down the carbon footprint of every product that we sell, which is obviously a lot more granular than simply protein disclosure.
Yeah.
But that probably isn't a fair comparison with all food businesses.
Yeah. Okay. You've got different, but that's helpful to explain how you might triangulate different sources to kind of build a picture.
It's exactly that, building a picture
of whether you're moving in the right direction and how quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Claire, tell us a bit about, because you were kind of one of the front runners in the sort of disclosure world on healthiness of sales. Can you just give us a little bit of insight about, I mean, I'm assuming you're sitting in board conversations within Tesco. How does this data get discussed? Like tell us a bit about, is it just sort of squirreled away in a kind of CSR department, or does it actually inform commercial decisions?
No, absolutely. I mean, if I look at our healthy sales, it's our healthy sales and our healthy and sustainable diets is 1/6 of our planet plan. So we have 6 pillars within our planet plan, which is governed at the highest level in our business. So that reports all the way through to the board and is overseen by our board level sustainability committee. So all of these conversations are very much had all the way through the organisation, as I'm sure you would hope and expect. But exactly to your point, something like healthy and sustainable diets, and in fact all of sustainability, has to be embedded in the business. So, my team work very, very closely with our commercial counterparts and with our supplier partners to absolutely embed our sustainability and our health plans within our joint business plans that we have within our supply base. So it's absolutely critical that it is embedded in the commercial part of the business. And we see that doing the right thing and that, having a healthier and more sustainable business not only is the right thing to do from a customer and a community's perspective, but actually is the right thing to do for the business. So it makes business sense.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to come to this is the last question now. So we talked about, progress being made, some important steps on reporting and so forth. But when we look at our dietary stats, we are so far from where we need to be. I mean, whichever way you look. So we start with beans, we probably need to eat 7 times the volume of beans to get to the Eat Lancet diet. If we're eating 4% of adults get their fibre target, way off on fruit and veg. 60% of our calories thereabouts from ultra processed foods. I mean, we are really, really far. Whichever way you look at it, whichever metrics you prefer, it's not good. And we've got a ginormous challenge to try and move in the right direction. And so I just want to go round one last time for each of you and just think, we've got this food strategy now. What are the other big levers that the government ought to be considering to enable you as businesses to go further and faster to shape these food environments that make those choices the most affordable, the most widely available and the most appealing? Where would you go next if you were Secretary of State in DEFRA? Who wants to go first? Go on.
I could get, look, I'll be the data geek again. So look, from the mandatory reporting piece, the transparency piece, I think there's more that we can do and more that we can balance out. So yes, it is about some of the metrics that we've flagged. We've already talked about its linkages to other pieces of primary legislation, things like climate transition action plans, really important part of that. But also there's a consumer facing element to this in terms of our food culture and how do we start to talk about some of this stuff in terms of product footprinting. And I know that's can be controversial as well in terms of
explain what that is.
So literally for every product that we sell, it will have a nutritional label attached to it. It doesn't have an ecological label attached to it. The technology is new and evolving to help us get there, but we're not there yet. And there's a lot of time taken to get the right level of data accuracy to give us the confidence in the reporting, but it is coming online. And I think it works both ways. It helps informed consumers, but from a manufacturer's perspective, it also gives us the data that we can act on and we know where the hotspots are and we can make changes accordingly.
Okay. I guess my follow-up to that would be if that might work in a purpose-led business where you've got kind of a clear ambition to do that, but where you might have another business that's like solely focused on bottom line. Is there anything else that the government needs to do to kind of help that one?
Well, the mandatory reporting is the key element in terms of that baseline. And again, we're then into, well, what is mandatory? Is product footprinting mandatory, or is it just healthy sales mandatory?
So you can build on the sales essentially.
Absolutely.
And go further. Yeah. Andrew?
Well, I don't know. You kept pointing at me as the one who's solely focused on the bottom line. I was like,
Oh no, I wasn't. I was over here. I wasn't.
I don't know who's been talking to you. I mean, I think there's, I suppose everything is, there has to be there's no silver bullet. We know that for starters, which is why it's such a complex field. I think there has to be a little bit of legislation. We've seen that good legislation works, whether that's sugar tax or even around legislation around, we talk about how hard it is to report in out of home, but we all report religiously on allergens because obviously that legislation and the importance of that legislation, so that we know that if minds are focused, it can be done. So it's about how do you create the collective will to get that done. So a little bit of what I would call gentle touch legislation. There has to be, I wouldn't say incentives, but there has to be support to enable these smaller businesses to up their game. So if you are a small business and you basically say, I'm going to have to recruit somebody to collate and report on all this data, then there should be support to cover that cost for a period of time, as you say. So you need a runway to get these businesses into participating in reporting. And then finally, I think it's around education. I think we've discussed before. We don't educate anything on food now. Domestic science or whatever you want to call it in schools is rapidly dropped from the curricula. I see Nottingham University dropped a whole sort of food technology courses from their sort of university level education this weekend. There's a whole host of areas where we aren't educating people on food and the need for healthy food, the route to healthy food, the benefits of healthy food. And unless you're doing that, you're not going to get that ultimate buy-in from the consumer and pull through from the consumer. So I think that's quite an important element as well.
Yeah, good point. As you've both touched on the wider kind of food culture point. But I think this point about SMEs is really interesting as well, because I think SMEs in communities, smaller businesses that are more locally based, if you like, and have a kind of local identity, if you like, can often be quite important for strengthening food culture. Yeah. People can go into a shop and they see produce from a farm down the road. There's a sort of a stronger connection that people are making to the food system and where it comes from.
Absolutely. We've talked about how do you get more provenance, more local food into public sector feeding, into school feeding, into hospital feeding. And again, you need a proper structured supply chain to do that, because they will need accreditation, they will need support in standards and auditing and everything else. And there's talk and there's action, and we're seeing a lot of talk and we're not seeing a lot of action. So I think that's where we sort of need some of those areas to be a bit more clarified in a food bill, as you say, would be excellent.
Here. Yeah. Rachel, what about you?
I would like to see a big focus on all of the levers that the government has available, which includes subsidies, taxes, the fiscal types of instruments. So we all know that one of the biggest impediments to everybody eating healthily is price. There's a huge amount that obviously influences price all the way through from exactly what is incentivized. Farmers are incentivized to produce from farm all the way to fork, and unpicking that and understanding how all of that could be changed to drive down the cost of healthier food. Because in the end, yes, there's education and everything else, but price. Imagine if a healthy diet was 10% less than a less healthy diet. What would it take? Maybe some scenario and sort of brainstorming, like what would it take to make that happen. And given that we know the huge indirect costs and some direct costs on say workforce and productivity and ill health to do with diets, the government is already hemorrhaging money through healthcare and social care and everything else, and we're damaging UK growth and productivity. So if it's already costing so much, then can the government not invest to bring those costs down and look at where that investment could go into the whole system, with the goal of making healthy diets affordable.
Claire, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think
I think we have to, well, we hear from our customers that they are asked, they're really interested in health and their interest is growing and they are asking for help. And they want healthy food to be easy, relevant and inspiring and affordable. And I think that's the challenge that we all need to work towards. And I think, some of that might be helped by legislation and by government, but I think some of that is going to be, a problem and a challenge that industry needs to step forward on.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, a great moment to end on. Thank you all so much for joining me and for giving us all a little bit of an insight into your worlds on these big challenges. I'd like to thank Impact on Urban Health, who've hosted us here in their offices today and who also have funded the report, and would encourage everyone to sign up to the newsletter. And if you are keen to make a pledge for growing your customer base on bean consumption, we would love to hear from you. And you can find out more about the Bang in Some Beans campaign on our website. So that's it for today. Thank you all.